Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 24th, 2023. It's Trump Surrender Day for those of you who celebrate or have been waiting, and really everybody should just basically admit that they're celebrating. Nothing outrageous or special today, everybody, in that sense. Everybody who has turned themselves in so far has had their mug shots put out, and the pranksters are having their way with those shots, photoshopping them to look like Batman villains, using, I don't know what, effects and apps and artificial intelligence and who knows what else to make them move and sing. I have seen that. Scott shared a collection of videos with that effect on there, although that gave me some other ideas about how I might actually use that myself. That'd be interesting. But lots of people having fun with the fact that the co-conspirators are getting themselves arrested and having their mud shots, really, published. And I noticed, by the way, the Fulton County Jail now, I guess, they don't use that background that marks how tall the person is, or at least it's not visible in the mug shots that were printed or published online. So we're going to be deprived of that. And it persists, the idea that somehow we're going to get a report on Trump's weight in all of this, which I guess I still think I was wrong initially to think we would ever get it. I really don't know. I don't pay enough attention to that sort of thing. I don't know what, and the practice may vary from county to county, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I have no idea. I haven't seen anybody reporting Rudy Giuliani's weight, but no one really cares what his weight is. But yet there's still a betting line on the over-under for Trump's weight, so it doesn't necessarily mean anything. They could just refund everybody's money and say, oh, we were completely wrong about that. We'll see how that goes. But it'll be a fun day watching him get arrested anyway. And everybody gets a mugshot out of it, and that's fun, and you can put it on T-shirts and have a great time. The Republican debate was last night. There was no chance that even had it been a serious debate among real Republican people who were actually interested in governing the country, I would have watched it. Anyway, so, this morning, all the social medias were filled with people saying that they watched the debate so I wouldn't have to, but I never had to in the first place. Only a few people actually acknowledged that I didn't actually have to do that. Greg says he watched some. I figured as much. That's the sort of thing that would tempt him. I would have, I guess, if I had remembered that it was going on. It was just that much of a non-event for me. If I had remembered it was going on and had the TV on the regular setting. I now have a smart TV. It's so smart that I have to trick it, into actually showing me any programming every once in a while. And it's part of the smartness of it is you can turn on the TV and watch a bunch of stuff without actually turning on the TV in the old sense. Like in the old days, you turn on the TV and whatever was on broadcast or even on cable, on the channel that the television last happened to be set to would start showing, and you'd get wrapped up in that, or you could allow yourself to get wrapped up in it if you were just killing time watching television, as was usually the case. But now the smart TVs are so smart that they will show you streaming first without actually having to tune into anything, without having to turn on your, in our case, satellite receiver. And so there was no opportunity to flip around the channels without going out of my way to figure out how to actually do that. So I never happened to wander by, and instead I watched 2 episodes of The Last of Us, the very interesting series which my kids laughed at me about because I didn't realize it was based on a video game that was 10 years old, and they knew right away, and I was trying to explain the premise to them, and they were like, we know that. That's not only is it a video game, it's old, and we know the premise. And I was kind of astonished by that, and I had to take to social media with that over the weekend. That's one of those I'm an old moments that struck me as very important. They were very surprised about all of that, and I had to explain to them. I would never have guessed that there would be a television series based on a video game. And, then it became one of those back in my day sort of things, like, arcade games in the 1980s, things that we played, or television-based home Atari and television. There was no backstory beyond there are aliens, there are space invaders from space are coming, and they're marching towards you. And if they catch you, they kill you. So shoot them. What a story. I guess you could make a Netflix series out of that these days. But initially, I would have said that your script would have been rejected. But these days, they'll make just about anything. Greg Dworkin is here. He says he watched some of the debate. Maybe he'll base a video game on it. Could be a Netflix series in it for him. I don't know. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. So basically, in the video games, there's kind of like three categories. I suppose you can add a couple of human things. But if you're talking about non-humans, you have space aliens that you kill. You have zombies that you kill, and that's where The Last of Us comes in. Yeah, and The Last of Us 2, which was, I thought, a better game.
Oh,
and then
but they were the last. How could there be a sequel to The Last of Us? All right.
It's a continuation of part one.
Unbelievable.
And then demons, like Diablo 4 or something like that, or sort of the Soul games, Dark Soul, etc.
Yes.
So you can do those things,
shoot
and then of course there's The Witcher, which is also based on a video game, which itself is based on a series of books. So
well, that makes some sense. When it's based on a series of books, that helps me grasp it. I mean, there's a story. It was a very interesting one, but like I said, there was no story to it. Why are you shooting these asteroids? You might crash into them otherwise. Why are you stomping on each of these squares and turning them into different colors? Because the Kubert monsters
Assassin's
are coming.
Creed, which is essentially in its various iterations based on Greek myth or
interesting,
or possibly
computer PC based games. Yeah, I suppose that does give you more of an opportunity, and it's
or
not
Norse myth. So,
without precedent.
The best video games take the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Norse tales about Odin and such, and build on them.
Yeah, like where you steal cars a lot.
Or the crossovers, like God of War, where the Greek gods
there's some
fighting the Norse gods, because you're not supposed to, but they do.
Well, gods, I guess, can fight whoever they want to. There are some very cerebral, what I guess still pass for video games out there that make use of storylines, and I guess there definitely were storylines.
They're more than classic storylines; they're the classics storylines.
Yes,
so
that's right.
So never underestimate them.
All right. Well, I will probably underestimate.
Now here's another tip for you.
Anyway, yes.
Okay, and this happened to me. If you take your smartphone,
so it's a story in the New York Times,
and stand in front of your smart TV, and Google it. You can probably find the settings that say, hey, stop giving me the stupid streaming paid content and just give me the frickin' cable TV that I wanted to turn on and watch the news, so I don't have to trick you into showing me what I want when I turn the TV on. There is a setting. It's just buried and they don't tell you about it.
There is, and I think I found it, and here's how I found it. I said, I found out that there's a setting where I could turn it on and then just press one button and it'll go straight to the streaming service that I want, and I don't have to go through all of this.
Yeah.
Except 50% of the time, instead of going to the streaming I want, it goes to the cable because it's wrong, or I did it wrong, or it's broken, or maybe it's a dumb TV. And it's usually an annoyance. But coin toss, 50-50, I could get the cable if I just tell it I want to see HBO Max.
Right. Well, my kid is visiting from California, so basically I said to him, look, I'm old. Fix the frickin' TV, okay?
Right. It's a good thing there's no clock on it, because I guess my birthday is coming up where everything starts blinking 12 after tomorrow.
Right. And if it was a VCR attached, I would throw it out the window because, that's too much.
It's demonic. That television show passed already. How could it be showing me? It's magic. Black magic.
Speaking of demonic, we had the debate last night. And, the obvious glib but true answers, the winners were Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
All right.
But let's talk a little bit about what happened.
job,
Dave
guys.
Hopkins starts us off, political scientist. I like him because he's steady and sober and doesn't get caught up in all the hype.
Not like his brother John's.
And he says, if history's a guide, it's not who you or I think did well or badly that matters. It's who the media consensus declares did well or badly. Number 2, Republicans don't evaluate candidates for electability the same way Democrats do. And number 3, and that's especially true, by the way, when you look at Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek rhymes with fake. That'll help you remember how to pronounce his name. Yep.
Vivek. Okay.
And he is fake. And so Republicans love him. He was awful last night. I mean, that was one of the worst things about the debate is anytime he opened his mouth. And the Democrats I know who were watching it with me said, it took about Michael A. Cohen, not the fixer Cohen, but the writer Cohen, said, it took me about 10 minutes to realize I loathe this guy. That's the reaction of Democrats, pointing Dave Hopkins in the right direction there. Republicans loved him. He was RFK for Republicans, which is to say RFK.
Yes.
Right? I mean, he was conspiracy theory, loud, brash, obnoxious. And the thing that was evident on the stage almost immediately is that Christie and Pence loathe him. They think he's a callow and brash kid who should not be on the stage with actual real grown-ups. And they treated him as such. And so did Nikki Haley. And he got hammered. And it wasn't Ron DeSantis who got hammered. Everybody figured Ron DeSantis is so weak, who cares about Ron DeSantis? And so DeSantis had a terrible night because he didn't break out and do what he needed to. But the worst night from a performance perspective was, in my view, Vivek Ramaswamy. And he's the one, of course, that did the best. The focus groups for Republicans loved him. He'll get a bump in the polls. DeSantis will drop. DeSantis was already dropping. Yeah, this is a Yahoo poll. DeSantis support collapses ahead of first GOP debate. This is on August 22nd. Last month, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis launched a heavily hyped campaign reboot in hopes of saving his struggling bid. Hasn't worked. His previous low at 23% was in mid-July. He was 12% in the poll right before the debate. He didn't help himself in the debate. He's dropping in the single digits in New Hampshire. Toast. Stick a fork in him. He's done.
Okay.
Said that before. It's still true. There's nothing that on his decline that was reversed by what happened yesterday. So DeSantis, bad performance. Ramaswamy, disqualifying performance that'll get him a bump in the polls because it's Republicans.
Yeah.
Okay. Nikki Haley was a grown-up. And so the donors probably love her. I would think, that famous picture of the boyfriend looking away from his girlfriend to the girl walking down the street.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. The girlfriend is DeSantis, the guy's the donors, and the girl walking down the street is Nikki Haley. And so all the donors really need to go to DeSantis and say, we're not giving you any more money. We're giving it to Haley. You're done. And DeSantis will have to deal with that in some fashion.
Okay. All right. I found that interesting that you said that everybody had beaten up on Ramaswamy. Like that was the plan.
Well, he was so
allegedly.
Obnoxious you couldn't help it.
I guess so. It's just interesting that it was the leaked plan, the debate plan for DeSantis, and I thought
everybody
how ridiculous.
But the reason it was the leaked plan for DeSantis is because Ramaswamy's been rising in the polls.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
8%, 9%, sometimes double digits. Everybody saw that. It's not just Ron DeSantis's brain trust, and I put that in scare quotes. Everybody saw it, so they were all ready for him. Chris Christie, of course, the attack dog, was a non-presence on the stage most of the night.
Oh.
Had a couple of good lines. For example, early on, Ramaswamy said something really stupid, and Christie looked at him and said, you remind me of, like, your Chat GPT.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I can see that. You
don't really know anything, but you just keep repeating these things you picked up on the internet. You really need more experience. And Nikki Haley took him to the woodshed. Pence took him to the woodshed. And it was pretty remarkable. Christie's other great moment, I mean, it was really a great moment that'll do him no good whatsoever, is he stood up for Mike Pence. And said Mike Pence didn't just reluctantly do a good job because the candidates were all asked, did Mike Pence do the right thing on January 6th? And Christie was vigorous in his defenses. Mike Pence, saved the country. Mike Pence did everything right. You shouldn't be half-hearted about Mike Pence. Mike Pence did the right thing. Everybody else was sort of half-hearted about it, like Tim Scott, who was awful, had a terrible night in the sense that he needed to break out. He did nothing. Mm-hmm. He was like a non-presence, like DeSantis. That doesn't help any of them because they have to catch Trump as ahead by 40 points, and that's why Trump was the winner. But the other also-rans, Asa Hutchinson, Burgum, not even worth mentioning. Tim Scott was awful and should drop out. His donors should pull the money from him. Haley stays. I'm guessing she's going to be the vice president pick.
Oh, okay.
Christie, said his piece, but not enough. He didn't really go after Trump as much as he could. None of them did. And the entire debate was basically a Fox News commercial for the Republican National Committee. All of the phrasing of all of the questions was, this country's a hellhole. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I can believe that. I've often said that's for some reason, that's the Republican patriotism platform. I hate America. It's a hellhole. It's disgusting.
But again, we talked about that yesterday with Ann Coulter. Her view is that it is a hellhole, especially if you look at the cities, which of course are all Democratic and have lives. People of color in them. And also immigrants live in cities, and we hate immigrants, so it is a hellhole.
She lives in two. She lives in one and votes in two.
Well, but that's the whole thing there. So again, I think if you step back and look and say, okay, are any of these people really qualified to be president? The answer is no.
No.
I think a lot of the independents who are watching this saw that. We know that from Navigator Research. Remember in the old days when they used to do the Insta polls that night, proving the pundits wrong?
Yes,
the
that's
pundits
what I was
hated
thinking
it, so
of
they
when you
stopped
were
doing
saying what the important things were. When you said, well, what's important is what the media, well, you weren't saying it, but what was important was the media's impressions. And I said, it used to be that, all right. We used to be able to shut that down. I guess they stopped doing it.
Well, now what they have is those dial things where you see the little lines going across the screen, and the dial goes up if you like what they say, and it goes down if you hate what they say. Right. And it was really interesting. Navigator Research was doing this with the pollster Margie O'Mara commenting on it.
Yeah.
On Twitter,
saying, I hate this methodology.
I'm not calling it X. On Twitter. And so what happens is that Ramaswamy was liked by men, which is no surprise. He's a tech bro.
Oh, okay.
Women hated him. And then when he said various things, people really didn't like it. For example, Vivek Ramaswamy called climate change a hoax. The independent dial participants' attitude dropped across the board, particularly among women.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's boring, among other things.
So they have the total, they have the males, they have the females, and everybody hated when he said that, as an example.
All right.
Okay.
I didn't like it.
Vivek Ramaswamy and Tim Scott's comments on shutting down the Department of Education and busting teachers' unions were not taken kindly by the independent dial group participants.
Okay.
Right? So you could see those sorts of things. The other interesting moment in the debate was when the Fox News people, who had to turn to the audience and say, let Christie and other people speak. Stop booing them.
No. No, go ahead.
And as an aside, it's terrible. It's awful. It's insane in a serious debate to have an audience at all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, really.
They never shut up. You tell them not to clap, not to say. This was like
some people tell them, please
a
clap.
Baseball game.
Oh, cool.
They didn't shut up the entire time. Yeah. And of course, that's what Fox News wanted. But it was a pro-Trump audience. And so if you said anything bad about Trump,
what else could it be?
They would boo you. And they spent the first hour of the debate avoiding Trump altogether. They spent 10 minutes talking about Trump. And this was the moment I was referring to. So Brett Baer says, okay, so I want to show of hands. If Trump is indicted and convicted, are you still voting for him?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And the only people that said no were Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie.
Aha.
Mike Pence, after all of this, I did the right thing. Were you voting for him?
Yeah, that's the problem with Mike Pence or defending Mike Pence is then you end up looking like a dummy defending Mike Pence, and Mike Pence
it's the same as Brian
lets everybody know why you're so stupid.
Brian Kemp said the same thing.
Yeah.
The election wasn't stolen. Georgia ran a fair and free election. The result was the result. Joe Biden is the president of the United States. Trump should never have done any of the things that he did. Were you voting for him? Well, of course.
Yeah, what else am I going to do?
Right.
With my time. All right. Well, this
Christie
is why
was
you
clear.
Can't,
he said, look,
them.
And he turned to the audience.
Hello,
and he
audience.
said, listen.
Listen.
What Donald Trump did, whether you believe it was criminal or not criminal,
it was.
It was wrong. No president should ever do anything like that. And the audience starts booing. And he said, listen, you can boo, but that doesn't change telling you the truth. And the truth is, no president should act like Trump acted. Hutchinson say the same thing, but nobody pays attention to him because he's like a 1% in the polls. So Christie had his thing. He had the opportunity to tell the audience that. Nikki Haley actually said something similar.
All right.
Said it a little bit nicer, but said basically Trump, shouldn't do the things he does, and nobody who did that should be president. Well, will you vote for him? Of course. And if he asks you to be VP, will you be his VP? Of course I will.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of hypocrites. And basically that's the debate. That's what happened.
Okay.
Those are the highlights, or lowlights, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I guess so. They should ask everybody who they ask, would you be his vice president? And they say yes. They should measure their neck size. And so we're just getting ready to hang.
For the noose, right, for the scaffold.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Just let us know.
So people were saying, he's awful, Langdon Grant writes, and yet Ramaswamy is a clear winner in CNN's post-debate focus group. Haley well back in second, DeSantis a distant third, nobody else gets a vote.
Maybe they only ask Indians.
And Tom Nichols said, Never Trumper, said, this makes perfect sense. Ramaswamy is the offensive, idiotic, countercultural candidate willing to say things just to piss people off. And so, of course, he's the immediate favorite among a GOP that instantly loves anybody that sensible people would find appalling.
Yeah, but DeSantis was going to ride that lane.
Right. But he's not doing well either.
Okay.
Because DeSantis doesn't know how to pull it off. He doesn't know how to smile. He froze during the debate again at one point.
Okay.
He's just terrible at this. His supporters are saying he did great because they didn't attack him. And so he comes out no worse than when he went in, which is fine if you're happy losing by 45 points.
I guess that's true. That won't really do much for you.
Right. And so none of them did what they needed to do, which is take Trump down. They were afraid to. So that's why Trump won the debate.
Okay.
And Biden won the debate because the Republican Party as a whole is exposed as a supporters and defenders and otherwise fellow travelers of a criminal enterprise. Did Trump do all of these things? Yeah, but I'm voting for him anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody sees it. Everybody gets to see it. The independents in the Dial group didn't like it when they did that. And so that's really the key. And so, I think Biden has reason to be happy about this. And I think that Donald Trump has a lot of reason to be happy about this. Now, interestingly,
he needs something.
The other poll that came out that was of interest, not just the Yahoo poll showing that DeSantis was tanking. There's one poll that's incomplete. 538, Juliet Morris, who now runs a place, noted that they were running a poll pre and post debate. And they had the pre-debate stuff out, who was in the lead, Trump. And the post-debate stuff really isn't going to be ready till late this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
Oh.
So we'll have more to say about that maybe on Monday.
It's being processed by a smart TV.
Yeah. But the poll that did come out yesterday was Franklin and Marshall in Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. All right. We know them.
It's a good poll. All state polls are a little noisy. But here are the key findings. August 2023 Franklin and Marshall College poll finds the state's registered voters' feelings about their personal finances are starting to improve. Many remain dissatisfied. 2 in 5 respondents say they're worse off than a year ago, but that's down from 46% in April. More say they are better off financially than they were last year. Pennsylvania voters remain more pessimistic than optimistic about conditions in the state, but that sentiment has also improved.
All right.
And so it's the most important thing, but it's getting better. The direction of state over time, it's negative, wrong track, is 48%, but it was in the 60s, 67% in February. So the right track was 25 September, October 2020. Now it's 39%. So things are improving.
That's nice.
Josh Shapiro, almost 1 in 2, 47% registered voters believe Josh Shapiro is doing an excellent or good job as governor, higher than April. Highest approval rating for a governor at this point in his first term since Governor Tom Ridge. Governor's job approval rating increased despite the state budget impasse. And nearly 3, and this is the key thing, nearly 3 in 5 or 58% registered voters think Mr. Trump's attempt to remain in power was a serious crime.
All right. It's a good number.
Right. And Biden's beating Trump in the poll by 2 points. Biden won Pennsylvania, I believe, by 2 points, if my memory is correct. So, what it shows is, and the other thing is, in that poll, Biden has, I closed the poll, so I'm going to do this from memory, and I'll double check it. But Biden had 42%.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump had 40%.
Yes.
And there was something like 16% undecided or want somebody else.
I see.
Okay. My point there being that 16% is going to break more than 50% for Biden.
Very likely, I would think.
Right. They may want somebody else, but when they're given the choice of it's this guy or that guy, you have to choose. And that won't happen for a while. That's when you start, quote, pushing the leaners, as they say in polling language.
Yes.
Then you get a different result.
Okay.
Because the end result of the election isn't going to be 40-40.
No, I doubt that.
A lot of those people are going to have to come off the fence. What I'm saying is they're not going to come off the fence for Trump.
Yes. I mean, you're only counted if you're off the fence. But yeah, once you cast a vote, you have to be counted for somebody somewhere. Unless the 16% were
and these
Amish,
are not Cornell West
that
votes.
was a possibility. Oh, no.
West
Very
is
unlikely.
not getting 16%.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll, continue talking about things that are political in various ways. Maybe more debate. I don't know. Are we done with debate, or is there more? You're free to do as much as you like.
Well,
it's supposedly important.
We're done with the debate, but I'm sending you a little clip of one of those Navigator survey dial things.
Yes.
So you too can take an instant dislike of Vivek Ramaswamy. I think it's very important that everybody sees him and takes an instant dislike to him, but it's really, really easy to do. A couple of other things in that Franklin and Marshall poll of Pennsylvania I want to highlight.
Okay.
It was Biden 42, Trump 40, someone else 16, and though someone else will, in fact, come off the fence.
Right.
GOP president, Trump 39, DeSantis 21, Ramaswamy 9, Tim Scott 6, who's going to drop, Haley 5, who's going to rise, Pence 5. So Ramaswamy was in third place here. He's in second place in other places. And so that's why everybody was training their sights on Ramaswamy. Here are the net faves, fave minus unfave. Shapiro, the governor, plus 30. Bob Casey, the senator, plus 9. Biden, minus 18. Trump, minus 30. Another, piece of evidence that say, look, people aren't thrilled with Biden, but they hate Trump.
Okay.
And upwards of 60% of folks have said they're not going to vote for him. Pennsylvania is another case in point.
All right, good.
So just keep that in mind as you look at things. Now, here's another interesting thing.
Oh, finally.
Finally. Finally going to say something interesting after all these years. So Aaron Blake, the Washington Post, writes, Americans aren't sold on a Biden impeachment inquiry. Most don't connect Hunter Biden's problems to the president in the way the GOP has. Well, remember, the GOP, who likes Ramaswamy, lives in a different world.
Okay.
On this earth, on this planet, in this dimension, legal things matter, facts matter. Ramaswamy is seen as a callow youth who shouldn't be on the stage, and Hunter Biden is not the be-all and end-all of everything.
All right. Well, that sounds normal.
So McCarthy is going to launch an impeachment inquiry. He has to, because Trump is demanding it, and Biden, is otherwise going to be president, so they have to do something. And they're really convinced that Benghazi was the thing that sunk Clinton. It isn't, by the way. The thing that sunk Clinton was James Comey opening up the investigation again 10 days before the election, plus Russian interference.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. And a reminder, Donald Trump doesn't have to be an agent of Russia. He wasn't. Nobody proved that. In order to be a tool. He was.
No doubt about that. And
that's why his campaign manager, who was feeding information to the Russians via private polling, went to jail.
Yes, briefly. But he went. That's true.
And why did he go? Because he was convicted.
Right. Because the
Russian hoax. The people went to jail over this, so not so much a hoax.
Some hoax.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Such an inquiry, writes Aaron Blake, would surely break ground in the politicization of impeachment. GOP theories about Biden's proximity to Hunter Biden's legal problems, most notably a supposed bribery scheme, have borne little fruit, and evidence has also contradicted some of their central claims. Now, McCarthy's been careful to specify it would merely be an inquiry. We're just asking questions about the moon landing, about 9/11, things that Vivek Ramaswamy has questioned. And also Hunter Biden and the Biden crime family. These are all just asking questions. It's all Q adjacent. Okay. But such a step might surely be momentous and might set the House on an irreversible course. And for how Americans feel about this, we can say a few things, Aaron Blake writes. They've taken a dim view of both Hunter Biden's actions and the fairness of the Justice Department's investigation. They don't necessarily see much of a link to the president, and there appears to be significantly less support for this impeachment inquiry than there was for those involving Donald Trump. That's because Donald Trump did things worthy of impeachment, and Joe Biden hasn't, and Hunter Biden doesn't have office, so there's no way to impeach him.
Right.
How Americans connect it and don't to President Biden, regardless of what you think of Hunter.
Yeah.
Many Americans who see something unsavory in Hunter Biden's actions or are skeptical of the DOJ's conduct see that distinction. Essentially, you're impeaching him for loving your son, your wayward son, your troubled son. And
really,
I don't think that, there's a lot of people in America who have a troubled family member.
Yes.
And I don't know that goes over well. In the Reuters Ipsos poll, Americans agreed 51-33 that Hunter Biden's legal troubles were independent of and unrelated to Biden's service as president. Independents said that by a 2-1 margin. Even 32% of Republicans agreed.
Okay.
And while half of Americans in the Fox News poll saw something illegal in Hunter Biden's actions, 38% said the same of the president's supposed connection to his son's business dealings. And that 38% is overwhelmingly Republican. Only 33% of independents seeing something illegal in the president's action. If you have an election, you get between 33 to 38% of the vote.
Yes.
You've been
clocked. Is that not enough? Oh, no. Well.
That's a landslide.
Okay. Unless you claim it's not and then just show up at the Electoral College and say, we won. I think you can try that.
Right. So, by contrast,
speech.
majorities of Americans and sometimes 6 in 10 supported the 2 Trump impeachment efforts early on.
Well,
so clearly consensus just isn't there for a Biden impeachment inquiry in the way it was for Trump. Doesn't mean Republicans won't try to force the issue. Of course they will.
No, they already say
they have no backbone. You could see that in the debate last night.
I understand.
There are no leaders in the Republican Party.
Oh, right. True. No single one anyway.
They're all
going different directions.
Defending a criminal enterprise.
Yes.
In some cases, they're actually, to quote a sage and a political consultant, they're taking notes on a criminal conspiracy.
Yes. Right. Lots of that happening, and it's coming out in court piece by piece.
Right.
Yeah. And yet, right, their solution to everything is impeach the other guy who didn't do this stuff. And I understand that there's chatter now that as soon as they get back from their August recess, that might actually end up being their focus when they get back. Because it's not going to be, keeping the government functioning. They can't.
Well, Donald Trump is going to be 6'0" and 300 pounds today. And so they have to do something to distract from that.
I guess so.
So he's going to order an impeachment.
Oh, an impeachment. Okay.
And 2 hamburgers.
Right. I want you to take, and the buns are each a pizza. That's my new triple down sandwich.
Another piece in Politico here. GOP's anti-woke campaigns have voters hitting snooze. And by the way, education and woke stuff didn't really do well on the dials last night when people were watching it. Polls show little support for attacks on corporations' handling of environmental and social causes, even among Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, they're terrible.
The data comes as candidates who have anchored their campaigns in attacking big business, including DeSantis and Ramaswamy, are struggling to gain significant traction against former President Trump, who leads the field by a wide margin in the polls. If you look at candidates numbers 2 through 9, I guess we should include RFK in that, they're all trailing Trump by a large margin. So whether DeSantis or Ramaswamy or Haley outmaneuver each other to see who's second or third, I need to say this in the narrator voice, it didn't matter with the Republican electorate.
Yeah.
Right. GOP pollsters say the recent data show many voters on the right, in line with the traditional conservative ideology, don't want government meddling in business. They're overwhelmingly concerned we're going to have too much regulation around these issues, said John McHenry, vice president of North Star Opinion Research. The flagging poll results haven't stopped the chorus of Republican leaders from criticizing what they deem to be a leftward tilt of large companies like BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, along with Target, Bud Light. GOP officials have said big business has become beholden to an agenda that's strayed from traditional profit-driven capitalism. While some corporations show signs of retreating in response to the attacks, polling suggests Republicans who have leaned into the party's growing populist bent may need to start picking other targets. Okay. So that's the future. CAP Action Fund, that's a Democratic group, found a majority of voters, including a majority of Republicans, support corporations being environmentally and socially responsible. There was more support for being environmentally responsible than socially responsible. 6 in 10 voters in the CAP poll hadn't heard of ESG investing, despite the attention it's getting from GOP politicians. That's when Ron DeSantis and other people talk about woke and anti-woke, and like normies look at them and saying, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
So Ron Bonjean, who has researched GOP voter sentiments on the issue, who's a Republican strategist, said lawmakers have squeezed most of the juice they're going to get out of corporate wokeism on ESG issues for now.
All right.
Right, ESG. You say ESG, normies eyes cross and say, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. I can't even guess at what ESG. I mean, I can because I read the stories, but otherwise, yeah. Maybe Glenn Youngkin is
environmental,
smart.
Social, corporate governance.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like this is maybe why Youngkin said maybe I'll pass on the presidential race, not just because the field is crowded, but that lane that I thought I could ride to the presidency. As it turns out, you can't.
Yeah.
So forget it. Or maybe he's really dumb. And he's just
those
try
roads where like there's 3 lanes and the one on the right merges, and so now there's only 2 lanes.
Yes.
That third lane is Youngkin's lane.
Right. And maybe
it disappears.
It's closed for construction.
And then it becomes 1 lane, and that's where Trump is.
Right.
So this is public notice. Aaron Rupar talking about last night. Takeaways from the GOP's 2-ring debate night circus.
2-ring.
Trump was being interviewed in a taped interview with Tucker Carlson, which I don't think a lot of people watched. We'll have to get the ratings and see how many people did watch
There's
this
no
thing.
rating.
There were a couple of comments that came out of the Tucker thing that people were talking about, but that's it. Nothing like what he usually used to have when he was on Fox News every night.
Okay.
Right. One of them that I
should
saw
do a bunch of
kind
murders.
of funny. It was Tucker saying to Trump, but basically, like, they're going to want to kill you. Don't you think they're going to want to kill you?
I mean,
and I thought to myself, Tucker should have added, I want to kill you.
Right. I told everybody at some point that I did.
I mean, everybody knows I hate you. It's on record I hate you. It was in the Fox News suit. If anybody wants to kill you, I do. Why don't they want to kill you? I would think they'd want to kill you.
Yeah. Maybe I could tell everybody where you are right now. Oh, that's why they taped it.
Right. Yeah. And Trump, in turn, used about a civil war and how violence is coming.
Oh, well. That's his usual message.
So that's on the one hand. The other hand, and that's why it's a two-ring circus. That's ring number one. Ring number two is Vivek Ramaswamy emerging as a punching bag.
All right.
That was Aaron Rupert's take on it. Now, remember, it's true. Everybody punched Ramaswamy. But you also have to remember that the Republican electorate loved it.
Loved it? Like, you mean they loved punching him or they love him for taking the punches?
They love him for taking the punches.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's.
We thought he looked like a punching bag.
Right, but they like punching bags.
They like being a victim. See, that's the whole point.
Okay, that makes some sense for us now.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're a victim and everybody's ganging up on you, you must be right.
Right, because they're strong
we're all
leaders
victims.
Or something.
They're trying to take away our America, and you represent us.
Right, unless the reason you're being punched is you're criticizing Trump. Then it's bad. That's Christie. So they measure everything by how many punches you take. I punch you with my good hand, I support you. I punch you with my bad hand, I hate you.
Right. And here's another one from Navigator Research. Vivek Ramaswamy called climate change a hoax. Our independent dial participants' attitudes dropped across the board, particularly among women. So there's another one for you. So there you have your two little clips where you can look at Ramaswamy and say, each one was like 35 seconds and I already hate him.
All right. Awesome. Easy to include in the roundup today. Everyone should spend a minute hating Vivek Ramaswamy.
Right.
I can't believe Vivek is the name I couldn't pronounce.
Vivek the fake?
Those two.
No question.
Yeah. I like your pronunciation guide. That's easy to remember. But yeah, as between his first and last names, you'd think I'd be tripping a little harder over the last name. Maybe we're saying that wrong.
No, it's smooth. So getting back to the indictment and other things.
Yeah.
Georgia always has news. You may remember there was a 2-track attempt to leave me alone from Jeffrey Clark and from Mark Meadows that was simmering in state and federal court.
Yeah, this is an interesting description. Okay.
Regarding Georgia. Okay.
Right.
And on the one hand, the response from the federal judge looking into this first was asked by Mark Meadows and by Jeffrey Clark to stay the arrest.
Stay it.
Stay it. Give me a stay.
Yeah.
For various and sundry reasons. You recall Jeffrey Clark rationale was he was too busy.
Yes.
And Mark Meadows was that I was doing my presidential duties and we have to discuss this later, so in the meantime, don't arrest me.
Yeah.
And the federal judge said, no way.
All right.
There's two separate things going on here. You want to be not arrested. That ain't happening.
All right.
On the other hand, we have a hearing on August 28th, which is Monday. I may have said Friday inadvertently yesterday, but it was August 28th. That's Monday.
Yes, okay.
And at that hearing, an evidentiary hearing, that's when you get your chance to deal with the second part of this is the other track, which is you want this removed from state court to federal court.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So in that regard, Fonnie Willis in the Fulton County DA's office respond by saying, look, there is no question that everything that Meadows and Clark did was illegal, and it wasn't part of their presidential duties.
Couldn't.
And the reason that it wasn't part of their presidential duties is very simple, and I'll spell it out for you, and I will give you examples. It violated the Hatch Act.
Yes.
They're not supposed to be doing campaign stuff.
Right.
when you're officially president. So you can't do campaign stuff and then claim you were doing your presidential duties. It's a violation of the Hatch Act, and therefore you are not entitled to relief. That's what she told the federal judge, and they will discuss that on Monday.
Yeah, that may work better, from our perspective, better against Meadows than Clark. But, yes, I mean, that's a major issue for them. They're not supposed to have been meddling in those things. But Clark, I guess, will be claiming, well, it wasn't that I was interested in the outcome of the election per se. It was that I was interested in making sure that it was fairly administered. And I had evidence, quote unquote evidence, that it hadn't been. And that was the only reason I chose to interfere.
But you were interfering after it had already been settled, after you had already brought it to court, after you had lost. And you have no evidence to show that you have a proof in a court of law.
Right. Yeah.
That there was evidence that you should think that there was something funny going on.
Right. And at a minimum,
produce it if you have it.
A violation of the DOJ's manual for when you can and can't be interfering in something like this. Well, if you have no evidence and there's no way you can make this presentation to a court at this point without being sanctioned and disbarred, then you don't do it. And it would be an unofficial. Officially, you're not supposed to be doing this. So even if it's not a Hatch Act violation, it's a violation of DOJ policy. On top of which, all of this meddling that you were doing, you came here saying that we should transfer this case to federal court for you because Georgia, as a state, has no jurisdiction, personal jurisdiction over you because you haven't had enough connection to Georgia. All of this interference in trying to get us to reverse our election is the connection with Georgia that you seem to think you're missing in all of this. Where were you sending your letters? Who were you trying to pressure into holding a special session and reversing the results? Georgia. So all the very reasons that you said, and argument number one over here, that you should be immune from prosecution because you were just looking out for the integrity of the results of the election in Georgia is actually proof of personal jurisdiction over you as well. So thank you for bringing that up. That settles both sides of the case. We're done. That should move quickly, or it could.
Right. Apparently, Trump fired his Georgia lawyer.
Yes, I just saw that verse against or on the social medias. I don't remember.
And then picked up a guy named Stephen Sadow, who's now his representative in Georgia. Prosecutions intended to advance or serve the ambitions and careers of political opponents have no place in our justice system. That's going to be his defense. The president should never have been indicted.
No. Well, sure. Why not? So jettisoning your lawyer on your arraignment day is usually a big winner. Right. And picking up your lawyer off the waiver wires at the last minute should do well, too.
Right. So Kenneth Chesebro filed a demand for a speedy trial. That's going to be difficult with all the complicating 19 other people. Mm-hmm. We talked about the fact that we have flippers, so that's also good.
Speaking to
Brian Tivas, the Georgia attorney who represented Rudy Giuliani in bond and surrender negotiations, the one that found total landscape bonding for them.
Okay, right.
Says he doesn't know if he'll continue to represent him in the case and doesn't know who paid for the private plane Giuliani took to Georgia when he said he was broke and therefore couldn't afford bail.
And that's a good reason not to continue representing him, too. Yeah, I guess he's there on an emergency basis because he spent the entire run-up to surrender time claiming that he couldn't secure an attorney. And, that was a little confusing because usually what ends up happening is that you can't secure an attorney, huh? Well, one will be appointed for you by the court. Everyone who watches the cop shows knows about that. Although the complicating factor is, well, if you can't afford one will be appointed for you from the court. And you flew here by private jet. Yeah, you should have gone on Prigozhin's jet, by the way.
Anthony Michael Kreese, the Georgia State legal professor and analyst, said, you know what? I'm not here to offer Trump advice. This is a mistake. Drew Findling, who was his lawyer, was the best lawyer he had anywhere.
Oh, well, that's not as big of a compliment as you might think. But
yes, but at the same time, it's
true.
like the good ones don't really want to stay.
Yeah, well, they know.
The good one was probably advising Trump to lay off a lot of the stuff Trump doesn't want to lay off of.
And he's not going to do that. And they probably told him, what was that advice I got? Everything Trump touches
dies.
Something.
ETD.
Yeah. He's like, was it turned to gold? No, it was.
No.
Dies. No. Oh, well, I withdraw. Okay. Well, good. Everybody should get out.
That's a Rick Wilson one. ETTD.
Yeah.
Hashtag.
Yeah. The guy just found out what that means.
Right.
Good. He's out. Next.
So I'll throw this in there because I thought this was interesting. Of course, I'm a retired doctor, and one of the reasons I thought that was interesting, Eric Segal, who is Anthony Michael Crease's colleague and mentor over at Georgia State, wrote a whole piece about law professors acting as pundits and tried to make the distinction between being a pundit and being an expert commentator.
Okay.
Essentially, you stay in your lane. You don't commit yourself to writing something every week when you really don't have anything to say. When you don't know, you say you don't know. Yeah. But it just feels weird to have a foot in both places. Social media as a commentator or being asked to be on TV all the time, and then being an expert in your field who does actual research and so on and so forth. So it's okay. It feels schizophrenic in a way to have to do that. So that's why I thought, I found it interesting.
Yeah, this is a warning for kids not to become, what's his name? Jonathan Turley.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Do not be Jonathan Turleys. Stay in your lane.
Something to say.
You don't know when you don't know. Stick with the research.
Yep. That's his problem right on the nose. Like, committing to writing a column when there isn't anything to say. So you have to make something up and then being unwilling to say, I don't know how this is going to come out, or this is new, or, instead, law professors love floating their theories about how things should go, but he definitely takes it a step beyond. They usually don't float the theory unless they have one, as opposed to, I don't know, people are asking me for a theory and it's almost 6:00, so I better come up with one.
Right, exactly.
Wow. All right, well, that's good. Good advice for everybody. We didn't mention, except by my inserting it in wistful comment about Yevgeny Prigozhin, I assume faking his
Biden
own death.
Biden looked at it and said, I don't know what happened, but I'll tell you this, nothing happens in Russia without Putin being involved.
Yeah, well, that's
all we know.
Pretty much it. His plane crashed, or at least that's the claim. I think he's faking his own death and moving to
his plane crashed with a bunch of holes in it. Which generally come from missile attacks.
Right. We don't know what happened. All of a sudden, both wings exploded off of it.
Normally don't belong there. Like if it were a bomb,
maybe
it would be pressure from the inside blowing things outside, and you'd see debris of a different sort.
Okay.
But when you see a whole wing riddled with holes as if it was shot with a Gatling gun, it probably wasn't a
you mean this
error
Gatling
with
gun?
The equipment.
Yeah, probably not. Maybe he was on it. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he's faking his own death. Maybe he was just Russian and in the way.
We don't know, so I'm not commenting on it because we don't really know what happened.
Yeah, I'll comment on it. I don't know what happened, but it was an amazing thing. If you weren't telling me that you had watched the debate so I didn't have to, you were telling me something about falling out of a window in Russia. That was about 75% of social media was on one of those two lines. Right.
And then final thing I'll talk about is a follow-up interview by Isaac Chotiner, who's just a great interviewer, did with J. Michael Luttig about his contention that he and Lawrence Tribe wrote that...
Took 17 hours, this interview.
Wrote that Trump really was disqualified from being president.
Yeah.
So Chotiner said, well, how does that work? You wrote that the Baud and Paulson article conclude that Section 3 requires no legislation, criminal conviction, or other judicial action in order to effectuate its command, that it's self-executing. What does it mean? So they use the example is age requirement.
Yeah.
Right? If you're 32 years old and you apply to be on the ballot, the state secretary of state can say you're ineligible.
Yes.
That's not a court thing. It's an executive function.
Yes.
So you don't need the judicial, you have to go to trial and decide that. You can challenge it in court after. But the Secretary of State has the power to do this. And that's what we mean by self-executing.
Well,
in other words, the secretaries of state in the individual states, because state elections are how we determine who's president, secretaries of state would have the power to say you're ineligible because that's what they do. You want to challenge it in court, you go ahead and challenge it in court. But that's the mechanism by which this happens.
Right.
That's why it's interesting that Gavin Newsom said, we're going to look at this in California. That's a real threat.
Good. He should. Not that he was in any danger of winning their electoral votes, but lead by example. That's not a bad idea.
So Chotiner said, listen, let me read some more criticisms. Here's criticism from a friend of yours who's a conservative guy. It's not obvious that partisan officials in state governments without specific authorization should apply broad and uncertain definitions to decide who can run for office. Mm-hmm. He read that to Luttig and said, what do you think about that? Luttig said, I don't know if you're a lawyer or not. Mm-hmm. And Chotiner said, I'm not. Yeah. And Luttig said, okay, when a professor says it's not clear, he's not saying that the Constitution isn't an additional alternative option. What he's saying is that it's not clear.
Yeah.
You can do this and you can challenge it in court.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, I don't really buy that as self-executing per se, but that doesn't matter. That's a quibble. What he's saying certainly is a valid theory, and Secretary of State could absolutely do it.
Further, and I'm rushing and talking over you because we don't have much time left.
No.
I'm going to read this into the record, and I'd like for you to use it, said Luttig. The 14th Amendment itself, Section 3, answers the question whether disqualification is anti-democratic. It is not. It's the conduct that is anti-democratic. And that's really a hugely important point that goes to everybody complaining about the fact that Trump is being indicted and it's political. It is not an overt political act. The conduct is or is not illegal. Pure and simple, nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, right. It wouldn't be political if he was 32 and they said no to it. Right.
Right.
Absolutely
exactly
true.
right.
It's a good example.
Yeah. So there it is.
We're still going to have to work it out.
Interesting as well.
I think so too, and I think I have that article, so maybe we'll discuss that a little bit more. In the meantime, we wrap it up, and we'll be back in just a minute.
And I'll see you Monday.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I am very interested in this article that we just left off on, and I can see that Greg wanted to perhaps discuss a little bit more from it, although maybe he got all the main points in. But we were running out of time, and so now, not only have I run out of time, I've run out of free articles from the New Yorker, which I guess one of these days I'll have to consider subscribing to, because that does happen to me a lot, and it's supposed to mean that you like their coverage of things, and so you might want to consider subscribing. But so far it hasn't meant that for me, and it won't now because, of course, I have it saved in Pocket, and that'll get me around it, and blah, 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 something, late capitalism. The point is, I wanted to take a look at this, and I guess I could be, I don't know if it really pays to be a little bit critical of Judge Luttig here, but there's room for doing it, and he would agree, I think, and all he'd really have to do is fall back on what I just said, was that at best it's unclear, right? Okay, so if I'm acting the part of a law professor here, and I'm not a law professor, but I guess I could be, and I don't know if I'd be a very good one, but I guess I have the degree that would allow you, to do it. I just don't think I could convince anybody to hire me to do so, nor would I want that. But anyway, he would just say, yeah, well, okay, what you're saying is it's unclear. And I've already said it's unclear, but my thinking is that a Secretary of State would be well within bounds to just say, I'm not putting Donald Trump's name on the ballot in this state. He would sue me. Other people would sue me. Some people would have standing to sue me. Some people would not. But assuming we get all the way to court, it's all Luttig is saying here is, I think there's a better than average chance that the judges who hear this case would be convinced by the argument that it doesn't require any adjudication of the claims of insurrection here, simply that it belongs to the discretion of the Secretary of State to make this decision. But I'm not positive it does, because then there's a question of, well, what decision is being made here? Luttig is saying, well, it's pretty clear that it's within the discretion of the Secretary of State to, witness, to take executive, I guess, rather than judicial, taking executive notice of the fact that the 14th Amendment exists, that the third section exists, and that it spells out pretty plainly what the penalty can be. But it doesn't get past the question of, all right, but if you're talking about the person having participated in an insurrection is a part of the criminal code with which you can be charged. It seems to me at least plausible that you should have to wait for some sort of adjudication of guilt in a charge of insurrection before you feel justified in executing your discretion to keep them off. But I don't know that there is discretion. I think, and it's certainly arguable. And in most cases, I would think that if I were in a case involving this and I was before Luttig as a judge, I would think, no, he'll be loath, certainly, to allow me to have the discretion to disqualify someone from the ballot on the basis that they were guilty of insurrection when there's been no adjudication of guilt in any court cases charging insurrection. Other people have done it, and I guess you could point to that and then maybe say, well, certainly a good number of the people who have been convicted for their activities on January 6th have been convicted under insurrection charges. Have they? Well, seditious conspiracy. I mean, maybe that's close enough. I don't know. I'm not positive that he's right here, but I wish he was. And of course, self-executing, I don't know if there's anything I would ever define really as self-executing. I mean, even in the case that the example he gives here, it's executed by the Secretary of State. Now, the Secretary of State will claim that he has the authority to do it because something, but there's still an execution here, and it's not even Trump's, which I wish it was. All right. Let me take a look at the article here and go over it piece by piece here. So the introduction Greg shared with you, saying that earlier this month, 2 conservative law professors announced that they would be publishing an article in the next UPenn Law Review next year, arguing that Trump is ineligible for the presidency. You know who they are. You know what the argument is. It rests on their interpretation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which states that office holders such as the president, although it doesn't say the president, but it does talk about all officers of the United States. So we'll skip that argument. That anyone who has taken an oath to support the Constitution and shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof, will no longer hold such an office. Several days ago, Lawrence Tribe, a liberal professor, and J. Michael Luttig, a conservative former judge for the U.S. Court of Appeals, wrote an article for The Atlantic in which they essentially endorsed this view. The former president's efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election and the resulting attack on the U.S. Capitol place him squarely within the ambit of the disqualification clause, and he is therefore ineligible to serve as president ever again. Would that it were universally regarded as true. Luttig was once on the Republican shortlist for the Supreme Court. Recently, he's become an outspoken critic, though he's taken his time about it, of Trump. He also offered legal advice to Mike Pence when the then vice president was being pressured by Trump not to certify the election results. Luttig and I, and this is Isaac Chotiner here, recently spoke by phone about whether Trump is in fact disqualified. During our conversation, which has been edited for length and clarity, that's good, we discussed the mechanism by which any removal of Trump from state ballots would take place, the different objections to Luttig's argument and why he thinks the Supreme Court is likely, in fact, to get involved. And it's put this way. You write that Bode and Paulson conclude that Section 3 requires no legislation, criminal conviction, or other judicial action in order to effectuate its command. That is, Section 3 is self-executing. What does that mean in practice? Not to repeat the question in the answer, but it means that no legislation by Congress or judicial decision or any other finding of a court of law by virtue of a conviction in a criminal trial, for instance, is necessary for the clause to operate against someone who has previously taken an oath to support the Constitution and thereafter engaged in insurrection or rebellion. I mean, unfortunately, that is repeating the question in the answer. This was one of the largest unanswered questions until Bode and Paulson's comprehensive research and scholarship on the clause, including whether congressional legislation is required, whether a particular individual is engaged in insurrection or rebellion, and whether there must be a conviction for the same in order for that individual to be barred from holding future office in the United States. Well, let's see. I mean, he says that, but maybe without a recitation of, 20 pages of their paper. It might, he offers no answer as to why that's the case here. Like, well, why don't you have to wait for an adjudication? And it may be that the very lengthy article, 126 something or so, as I recall, pages, might have a 20-page discussion about it, which might be convincing at the end, and he doesn't have space to give a condensed version of the argument here. I don't know. What would be an example, he's asked, of something else that would be self-executing in a constitutional amendment? And I guess there's the age thing. I mean, I don't know that the age thing, I mean, it is, I'm sure everybody would consider it to be the case, or would have, up until this point. But for instance, like, I don't know, you want to stand an interesting Republican accusation on its head and see what we make of it. All right. A guy, Ramaswamy, turns out to be 32, let's say. And he wants to be on the ballot. And a Secretary of State of any state you want. Let's pick one. We'll make it Ohio because, I don't know, it's a short name and easy to spell. Secretary of State of Ohio says, you can't be on the ballot. You're 32 years old. Ramaswamy, you're out. At which point, Ramaswamy, because he's that callow, stands a traditional Republican attack point on its head and says, show me the birth certificate that says I'm 32. Right? Show me the birth certificate, the original long form birth certificate. And everybody says, how will we get, you're the one with the birth certificate. Show it to me. And then Ramaswamy says, here's my birth certificate. And it says I'm 35 years old. But I got it from a guy who printed the Electoral College certificates for Trump in, what state do you want it to be this time? In Michigan in 2020. Same guy wrote those. And you guys said those were valid, so this one's valid too. And now you find yourself having to go to court to decide whether or not this stupid, facially false claim by Ramaswamy to be 35 years old already is true or false, despite the fact that everybody supposedly knows. But how do you know? Because Wikipedia said so, that he was only 32? How do you know that that's right? He's got a document that says he's 35, but he forged it. He as much as said that he's forged it. Well, we're going to have to adjudicate that in court. What happened to it being self-executing? Well, Luttig is perhaps correct in that the Secretary of State could say, I don't care that the guy says he has a document. I know it's fake. He's 32. I'm going to disqualify him from the ballot. And if he wants to get on the ballot, let him sue me and prove in a court of law that he is 35 and that I was wrong to execute my judgment here. In that sense, it's self-executing in the sense that a Secretary of State could absolutely claim unilaterally to have the right to do this. But it's not clear that the courts would uphold that in every instance. And, now that we're sort of post-truth on everything, and now that we're forging documents left and right and claiming, well, teach the controversy. This could be a document, and it might not be a document. I don't even know. I call as a witness Rene Magritte. So, anyway, I don't know. At any rate, you could... Nothing's self-executing anymore. Nothing, there's no facts. We're post-factual, we're post-truth, and you can litigate anything, and you'll have to. So, all right. But in the sense that it's possible that a Secretary of State could exclude you, you might be sued, and they can't get around to finishing the issue in time, and so your decision as Secretary of State stands until such time as the plaintiff can prove that he's been wronged and that irreparable damage was done, and you can sue that Secretary of State for money damages. I guess if that's the case, and you can only file the suit with at a time when there's not enough time to adjudicate it before the election, and they decide to let the status quo stand and let you recover money later. I guess that's self-executing, or could be considered self-executing. Well, let's see. Okay, so he's asked for the example. He gives the age thing. Removing someone from the ballot, Isaac says, because of age requirements seems like it would be easy for an official to do without making a judgment call, except I just complicated it for you. Someone's age is an objective fact. Or is it? Dramatic music. Whereas this seems like it calls for state officials to make judgment calls, this insurrection thing, which could potentially open things up for abuse. Is there a categorical difference there? He has asked. Well, there is a categorical difference. Luttig says there is vastly more judgment entailed in determining whether, for instance, the former president engaged in an insurrection or a rebellion than in determining whether a candidate was 35 years old. Maybe. That doesn't relieve the obligated election official from making that determination. The process for placing individuals on the ballot varies from state to state, but under our reading of the 14th Amendment, an individual election official could make that decision himself or herself. As a practical matter, is that likely to occur? Well, it would depend, I think, on the office of the election official. If it were the Secretary of State who was charged with placing individuals on the ballot, then I believe that decision by the duly appointed state official would suffice. But in all events, whoever makes the qualification or the disqualification decision, and whether they make it, that decision will be immediately challenged, probably by the former president himself, and that challenge would go directly into court, either state or federal. It would eventually make its way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Next response here from Chotiner. Michael McConnell, the conservative professor at Stanford and former federal judge like yourself, has commented on the issue, and he wrote, Congress has enacted a statute, 18 U.S. Code Section 2383, which covers participation in rebellion or insurrection, and which provides that those found guilty, quote, shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. This mode of enforcement has been enacted by the entirety or the entity entrusted with responsibility to enforce the 14th Amendment. It proceeds through the ordinary course of prosecution by the executive, trial by a court, decision by a jury, and appeal by appellate courts to appellate courts with due process at every step. Why isn't that the standard? Luttig is asked. His answer, McConnell, not Mitch, but Michael, is one of the country's most notable constitutional scholars and a dear friend of mine for 30 plus years. I don't know what you're reading from, but he doesn't say in the quoted passage that it is the only avenue for disqualification. No, but he just makes the observation, correct, of course, that Congress, through 18 U.S. Code 2383, has also provided a disqualification alternative. But that is not the same thing as to say that the Constitution itself is not an additional alternative. I don't know if Professor McConnell has said that. I've not read anything in which he said that. But, it's an objection, and it's a real one, and you'd have to clarify, and I guess you would have to ask McConnell what he thinks about that. But it seems to me that this is the sort of thing that Luttig, as a conservative judge, if he were facing a liberal plaintiff's argument that, well, the fact that Congress has legislated on this doesn't mean that's the end-all, be-all. There could be a magical self-executing thing floating around out there, which normally he would say, what difference would that make? Except that you would point and say, well, it's constitutional in nature, and you claim to love the Constitution and recognize it as a law unto itself, above and beyond whether, it would make no difference whether the Congress has legislated if there was a clear constitutional dictate about this. Except that it's not clear what the dictate is. You just want it to be clear. You having reached this conclusion is incredibly favorable to us. Thank God you have, because it would otherwise be impossible to convince a conservative judge like Michael Luttig that Congress having acted here is of no relevance whatsoever and should not be regarded at all in deciding what to do here. I mean, in most cases, he would say, but isn't it clear that Congress has here, by passing this legislation, asserted that this should be the standard? And all you'd be left with was, yes, but a judge could decide, nah, I don't care about that being the standard. I prefer to have it be a direct divination from the text of the Constitution made by me, because I'm me and they're them, and they came to the opposite conclusion of what I want, so therefore, screw them. I will go with what I think the Constitution says versus the explicit dictate of the Congress how this should be working. They don't have any right to say exactly how something should work. That's up to me to make law from the bench. Don't you understand that? I'm a conservative. Judges should be making law, not Congress. Now, this is the opposite of everything that Luttig and his conservative colleagues on all courts have ever said. So that's pretty amazing to me. But good. Thank God he said it. I prefer his conclusion. Anyway, Isaac Chotner then says, let me just read some more from McConnell. Quote, it is not obvious that partisan officials in state governments without specific authorization or checks and balances should apply broad and uncertain definitions to decide who can run for office in a republic when responsible officials with clear statutory and constitutional authority have not done so. And then there's I don't know if you're a lawyer or not. I'm not. Okay. What the professor said is it's not clear. He is saying that the Constitution itself is not an additional alternative option. Now, what I did read from Professor McConnell was that his concern, and we address it, by the way, in our article, is that it appears anti-democratic to him to let state elected officials responsible for putting people on the ballot do that without there having been a prior determination by a court of law that an individual engaged in an insurrection or a rebellion. Now, this is a very interesting, Isaac. About 20 hours ago, I responded on Twitter to my friend's concern about the anti-democratic character of the reading of Section 3 the Professor Tribe and I took, and I'm going to read that into the record, and I would like for you to use it. The 14th Amendment itself, in Section 3, answers the question whether disqualification is anti-democratic, declaring that it is not. Does it really? Rather, it is the conduct that gives rise to disqualification that is anti-democratic per the command of the Constitution. I posted that 20 hours ago, and it has almost 600,000 views. Not that I think that makes any difference, because one, the number of views doesn't mean anything at all, and two, it can't actually really be measured. But this is a good opportunity, by the way, for me to sneak in that there's an article out there. I could share it with you, that's basically debunking the claims that Trump will no doubt be making about the number of views that his appearance on Tucker Carlson's show on Twitter has, but that it likewise means nothing. But the thing actually we should concentrate on is, I don't know if this claim really works here. Let me see how much more does he give to this. So take a look at the 14th Amendment in Section 3. It says it answers the question whether disqualification is anti-democratic, declaring that it's not. It doesn't say anything about that, of course. It's certainly not in those terms. And I think he's overreading what it does say. But let's see. Where's Section 3 here? The relevant part. Well, obviously, it doesn't say anything in there anywhere about anti-democratic anything. Those words don't appear, and it doesn't really declare the action of insurrection or rebellion to be anti-democratic. It's just that it's understood to be the case that if we're a democracy and you rebel or foment insurrection against a democracy, well, then clearly we're supposed to conclude you are anti-democratic. Now, that doesn't necessarily follow. You're anti whatever the government is. And if we've declared this government to be democratic, it's easy to see how you could land on the conclusion that rebelling against it must be anti-democratic. But that's not even the case. You could be just as democratic and stand in opposition to this government, Or it could even be the case that the government thinks it's democratic, but really isn't, and that's the reason you're rebelling against it. Or you could say, well, I think we're just as democratic as the government is. We're just approaching things from a different angle, and we are anti this government, but we are pro-democratic. We didn't force anyone to join our insurrection or rebellion. They chose to. Or we had a vote, and they decided to join our insurrection and rebellion. I mean, I guess to the extent that state legislatures were said to be democratic representations of their populations back in 1861, was the secession movement any less democratic than the rest of the or the Union states and their interpretations of democracy? It's not like black people were voting in the North at the time. I don't think that they had that right there in the northern states either. Maybe, I don't know, maybe in some of them. But I don't know that the franchise was any more democratic in the North than it was in the South, but perhaps, but surely it would have been their contention. Look, the representative governments of the southern states came to a decision through the democratic process to secede. I don't know. I think he's jumping to conclusions here on this one. And the fact that it has 600,000 views means nothing and might not even be true. But he goes on to say, if you just step back from the legalese, the clause has its origins in the postbellum era. It was to disqualify persons who had previously taken an oath and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion. Yes, I have had so many people in the past 48 hours say to me, it just makes common sense, doesn't it? And I say to them, yes, I think it does in its application to the former president. I mean, I do too. I just don't know that his logic stands up here. And, we've fought against the conclusions that Luttig has reached in a number of other situations. Why not this one too? Just from an intellectual perspective, just as an exercise in legal thinking. I mean, I'll tell you what, pointing to the post-Civil War era as the origin of this, and I mean, that's correct, certainly. I think post-Civil War, it was just about as obvious whether someone had engaged in rebellion or insurrection against the United States after having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution as it would be today in attempting to disqualify someone from the ballot for being merely 32 years of age. Generally speaking, though now you can forge documents and fight over it, you certainly could have litigated all of this in 1865 as well. I didn't engage in rebellion. Well, you accepted a general's commission in the Army of the Confederacy, right? No. Who says? That's forgery. This is rigged. Nobody did that. But they certainly could have. Maybe somebody actually did claim that and lost. That's a possibility. But the point is, well, back then, just as you would know how old somebody is today and come to the conclusion, well, that just makes sense. 32, you're off the ballot. Everybody knows you have to be 35. It says so right here, self-executing. Well, back then, it was similar. You were in the Confederate Army. You were an officer in the Confederate Army after having been a member of Congress. You resigned and then accepted a commission as a colonel in the Confederacy, and everybody saw that happen, and that's all there is to it. Okay. Well, that was sort of quote-unquote self-executing at the time, not to mention the fact that they might actually have executed you for it. But anyway, I don't think that really gets him anywhere. But he does think it's pretty obvious. There's a little bit more here. I think it does make common sense, that is, in its application to the former president. He had taken an oath to support the Constitution, though he may say, I had my little tiny fingers crossed behind my back. And he engaged in insurrection or rebellion. Did he? We're about to have that trial. And, well, what happens if he's found not guilty in the first trial that takes place, if one takes place before the election takes place, and then a Secretary of State says, just as he refused to accept the outcome of the election in the state of Georgia, I refuse to accept the outcome of the trial in the state of Georgia. I believe he engaged in insurrection, and I'm going to self-execute him right off the ballot. Would Judge Luttig ordinarily have stood for that. If he supported the candidacy of this would-be president, probably not. But in this case, of course, he doesn't, and so therefore something. I don't know. This isn't the strongest reasoning in the world from him. Anyway, so does it make common sense? He says it does, because he had taken this oath and then, engaged in insurrection or rebellion, or had provided assistance, aid, and comfort to a rebellion in or around January 6th, when he attempted to overturn the 2020 presidential election. And he inspired and at least gave aid and comfort to the attack on the United States Capitol for the purpose of interfering with and preventing the joint session from counting the electoral votes for the presidency, yada, yada, yada. All just conclusions he makes. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back down to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Going to bend your mind a little bit more and continue on with this. I do think it's an important discussion in the abstract, but I guess I'll also say ground level truth here is that I very much doubt that I doubt that any Republican Secretary of State would do this on their own authority. I think it's possible that a Democratic Secretary of State or equivalent official might do this for the purpose of, forcing a court case, which is an amazing thing because, of course, this is all self-executing. It requires no adjudication whatsoever. Well, it's actually going to require the adjudication from the Supreme Court, which is what he's saying. I don't know how self-executing it is. If it requires adjudication from lawsuit being filed in state or federal district court and working its way all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, which will then hand down a decision, that doesn't feel very self-executing to me, but that's just quibbling about the terminology, I guess, in a sense. But, you should drop the self-executing thing. Anybody can spark a controversy on their own volition. It doesn't mean that there was something, therefore it was self-executing at any level. I mean, is the statute against armed robbery self-executing? No, it's not. But someone can set the whole thing in motion by making the personal decision to rob a bank. That's true. But the fact that he'll have to, have the case adjudicated against him in order for the state to deprive him of his liberty thereafter isn't very self-executing at all. But anyway, I see where he's coming from. I just don't think that it's particularly true. So anyway, that's where he is at the moment. Luttig says he gave aid and comfort in inspiring the attack. And he did give some aid and comfort in saying, go home in peace. We love you. You're very special. That's sort of aid and comfort. It's comfort anyway, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. Anyway, he says it's all very obvious to him, and that's a classic understanding of an insurrection or rebellion against the authority of the United States. That is to say, trying to disrupt the electoral vote count. I don't disagree, but, I don't think that bolsters his argument in any sense. That's a common sense understanding. Yeah, it is. Right. But then we have this thing called Article 3 where we say, yeah, common sense doesn't enter into it. The judges have to have something to do with it. And that's fine. But that means it's not that, at least it's not that self-executing at a minimum. Anyway, by the way, along the way here we have the comment from Brian Monroe, who is Canadian originally and now living in Mexico and has something to say about American jurisprudence. And that's okay. We're an open book when it comes to this stuff. And anyway, so he asks, well, if secretaries of state were to exclude Trump from their ballots, should, or really shouldn't, they also remove members of Congress that also participated or, quote, gave aid and comfort to the insurrection? Yes, they should. Absolutely. And I think Luttig would probably agree, but then Luttig would probably also, it'd be funny to watch him. I mean, maybe he's very good at it and maybe he wouldn't even make a face when he did it, but he'd start to think, well, is every Republican guilty of this? No, probably not. Which one should we be excluding? The ones that made speeches in favor of the insurrection during that day, after the fact? I don't know exactly when should not. And he would quickly realize, maybe not that self-executing after all. And it's pretty difficult. And I had to ask in response, and I kind of knew that Brian's response would be no to this, but when you ask that question of, well, shouldn't secretaries of state then be excluding members of Congress who did the same? The answer is, yeah, they should, but you can see how this quickly becomes very troubling. Like I asked him, would you dare to put it past a Republican secretary of state next time around then to exclude, or even this time, exclude Biden from the ballot on his conclusion, self-executing conclusion. It's something, Hunter's laptop equals insurrection, and that's it. Biden's off the ballot. And, you have to answer, no, I wouldn't put that by a Republican secretary of state, particularly now that this idea is out there. They would say, I was just taking your advice. They absolutely would. They're about to come back. Congress is about to come back from its August recess, and the Speaker of the House says we may very well take up an impeachment of Biden based on, I don't know what. I'm not even sure what the charges are going to be. But we're going to come up with something. They're about to impeach him. So is it really far-fetched for a Republican Secretary of State to say, I don't know, somehow to me, Hunter Biden's laptop equals insurrection? He obviously was selling out the United States somehow, and that's rebellion or insurrection in my view. And so therefore, boom, done. Completely wrong, not fact-based. Who cares? It's self-executing. Sue me if you think I'm wrong. And then we'll see what value that process really has. Well, you can sue, so it's okay. I don't think so. Well, anyway, Isaac Chodner then says, so to clarify, to Luttig, you're claiming mainly that the insurrection was specifically Trump encouraging the interruption of the proceedings at the Capitol, as opposed to things such as calling up Georgia's Secretary of State and asking him to find more votes. You are talking more specifically about the events of January 6th. Is that accurate? No. That is why I specifically said on or around January 6th. The calls to Raffensperger were part and parcel of the rebellion against the United States government. I mean, I agree, but that's all. The plan was to overturn the validly held election. Their entire plan was multifaceted and sprawling in its co-conspirators, according to the Georgia indictment. It was all part and parcel of the insurrection or rebellion. I think maybe he meant or rebellion against the Constitution. Chodner follows up with, the phrase in the amendment is engaged in, as in shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same. McConnell writes, Section 3 uses the verb engage in, which connotes active involvement and not mere support or assistance. Well, but then there's the or gave aid and comfort too. So I don't know. The gave is, I guess, supposed to be an active verb too, but giving comfort to somebody, I mean, what does that mean? Is it only limited to giving them blankets if they're cold? Or is it enough to say, I support that guy. He was right. He should have done that. We love you and you're very special. Is that comfort enough? Anyway, significantly, Section 3 also uses the verb give, and aid and comfort to. That comes next. But this is reserved for giving aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States, which has historically meant enemies in war. How do you see that reading, and why do you disagree with it? That's true, too. Like, he gave aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States. Were the insurrectionists of January 6th enemies of the United States? They say no. But we say yes. But on the other hand, Confederates would say no. No, we were just being true to the true values of the United States. It was the United States that wasn't being true to its values. I mean, there is that argument. Luttig answers, let me address the second bundle of questions first. Section 3 doesn't refer to insurrection or rebellion against the United States. Doesn't it? It is an insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution of the United States. Is that right? I mean, I guess I could see it that way, but let me see. Once again, back to the language. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may vote by 2/3 of each house to remove such disability. So this is in dispute. What is the same? Is it you took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States and engaged in rebellion against the same, meaning you rebelled against the Constitution, or is the same the United States? I would argue that it's not entirely clear at the minimum, right? And he would say, well, then that doesn't matter. All you're saying is it's not clear and we have to adjudicate this. Well, yes, I'm also saying we have to adjudicate it, which you're saying we don't, which is amazing. But anyway, no, it's not entirely clear at all to me that the same isn't meant to be the United States. You took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, but yet you rebelled against the same, meaning against the United States. No, says Luttig, I rebelled against the Constitution. Boy, that's a weird distinction to have to make. Okay, but that's what he says. It's insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution. I love the United States. I just hate this interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. But I don't know, man. That alone, in my way of thinking, would distinguish away Professor McConnell's point that the clause is limited to enemies in war against the United States. On the first bundle of questions, Professor Tribe and I say that in this particular situation, the ultimate definition of insurrection and or rebellion is the ballgame. Professors Bode and Paulson have concluded from their extensive research that as originally intended, those terms are to be given broad meaning and understanding, and Professor Tribe and I agree with that scholarship. I'd have to read that scholarship, to tell you the truth. Is there some aspect, he's asked, of the scholarship that you find particularly interesting or convincing? Answer, Tribe would answer differently, but I was particularly interested in their conclusion, which I just stated, as to the original meaning of those terms. I guess basically he's saying the scholarship somehow defines for him, somehow drives home that the framers of the 14th Amendment were upset about rebellion against the Constitution, not about rebellion against the United States. And in the context of an actual civil war, I find that astonishing. I think you would find significant disagreement if you were able to ask the founders or the framers of the 14th Amendment whether they thought that the Civil War was a fight about the Constitution or a fight against the United States. You weren't shooting the Constitution. You were shooting soldiers, and there were real people, and they represented the United States Army in that conflict. I don't know. I find that very weird. Next question. McConnell goes on to say, it is significant that the Department of Justice has prosecuted hundreds of persons for their involvement in the January 6th incursion at the Capitol, but has not charged anyone, including Trump, with insurrection under this or any other statute. Would it be fair for the Secretary of State or some other state election official to say, I am not an expert on this. I would defer to the DOJ, and if the DOJ charges anyone and they are convicted of insurrection, I would follow that through and not allow them on the ballot. but I don't feel comfortable making this decision. How do you feel about that thinking? And he answers, that would not be fair, to use your term, nor would it be correct, because drawing your judgment from the absence of prosecution by the Department of Justice is not law. No, it doesn't make it the law, but it makes it a reasonable interpretation. Say more, he says, about that, and he goes on to say, I'll be glad to, but I need not. If you said to me, listen, the former president did not engage in insurrection or rebellion because the Department of Justice has not prosecuted that against anyone involved in January 6th, then I would say to you, so what? It has no bearing whatsoever on the meaning of the clause. Maybe. I mean, I guess I kind of see the point, but it doesn't necessarily, it also doesn't have any bearing on whether or not it's a valid exercise of the power vested in the Secretary of State. You have to prove to me that it was an abuse of the Secretary of State's power to say, I take as my guide the Justice Department's refusal to charge anyone at all with insurrection. I guess I was wrong about that earlier, and I've caught that as we were saying it. What they've been charged with is seditious conspiracy, which, while a close cousin, and I guess you could make some argument, there is an insurrection statute, and no one, I guess, has been charged under that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's not necessarily the fact alone that the Department of Justice has declined to prosecute anyone, but that's a pretty good starting point. If you ask me, and I don't know that it's abuse of discretion to say, well, the people who had, in the first instance, the opportunity to level these charges have opted not to. And that usually means it's because they don't believe that they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of someone under that statute. I don't know why I am obligated to do that. I don't think that's the case. I could be justified maybe in doing so under your interpretation, but I don't see how I'm obligated to do so. Isaac Chotner then asks, let me give you a counter argument and you can tell me where I'm wrong. And Luttig laughs and says, are we arguing or is this an interview? Well, I'm trying to come up with counter arguments because I am personally agnostic on this, but I think it makes for an interesting conversation. I know all the counter arguments, he laughs. I agree with you that whether the DOJ prosecutes someone is not determinative of what the Constitution means. I just wonder whether the response I described might be appropriate for a state official involved in an intense partisan atmosphere who didn't feel like he or she wanted to make that call. So this would be more practical rather than out of deep belief. They could say, this is a contested issue that even esteemed law professors are discussing and debating. I just wonder if there is more validity to someone's hesitation at this practical level. Luttig is positive he's right, so he says, no, there's not. And it's worse than just that. These officials in this context, just like all other elected officials in different contexts, Isaac, have an affirmative obligation and duty under the Constitution and the laws of the United States to interpret them as best they can. It is not an option for them to abdicate that duty because of practicalities or politics. That is a great political answer, but it is a good legal answer. And the question that will settle it in my mind, and probably should settle it in your mind too, is, does Luttig believe that he, right now, has standing to sue any Secretary of State who refuses this obligation? If the answer is no, then he might be wrong here. Of course, standing is a doctrine that gets manipulated all the time. I'm sure we could remind ourselves of that. But let's say they even grant standing for this. Does Luttig believe that he would prevail in court suing a Secretary of State under, with a writ of mandamus? I am seeking a writ of mandamus from the court ordering the Secretary of State to disqualify Trump based on my conclusion that I think the Secretary of State should have reached the conclusion that Trump engaged in insurrection despite the fact that he has not been charged with insurrection. No one has been charged with insurrection, let alone been convicted under the insurrection statute. Does he think that holds water? Could he get that writ of mandamus? Could he force a Secretary of State to do that? And if the answer is, I don't know, then fine. You don't know. But say so at some point. But maybe he claims he has said so. Well, have you heard, he is asked, from any state officials who are interested in taking action to disqualify Trump? He says, if I had, I wouldn't be at liberty to tell you. Why not? You'd just be reporting that they have an obligation. Right? What would spill the beans? They have the obligation, do they not? Everyone should assume that they are about to take that action. But okay. Why? You just keep that private? Yes. Well, all right, fine. Do you expect this to get to the Supreme Court? I feel certain it will go to the Supreme Court and before the 2024 election. I feel less confident about that. The Supreme Court of the United States has the highest obligation under the Constitution to decide this question. It is not an option for the court to duck this question. Because of its importance? It's not its mere importance, Isaac. This will be one of the most fundamental constitutional questions ever presented to the Supreme Court in the 250 years since the founding of the nation. Let's put aside the specifics of Donald Trump and January 6th for a minute. How do you think an argument like this would go? And would you expect ideological divisions among the justices based on the type of constitutional interpretation it involves? Again, we are pretending that the court is not partisan here. How would you think about this ideological debate if there was no political context? The hypothetical, he says, entails no political considerations by the justices. Assuming that, I don't believe that any of the justices could, under the Constitution, disagree that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies today, as it did in the 19th century when it was ratified, and applies specifically to the former president's conduct in and around January 6th, as I described to you. I believe the only legitimate question for the Supreme Court, when this case arrives at the court, is whether the former president's conduct constitutes an insurrection or rebellion against the United States Constitution. Is this something you've discussed with any of the justices? He says, I would not answer that if I had. Courts have sometimes been wary of removing candidates from ballots too close to an election. Is there a time frame where you think this would have to be resolved? This is unprecedented in American history, so nothing that has been done by election officials in the past has any bearing. That's never going to be true. If Trump were convicted in the January 6th case in Washington, would that have a bearing on how courts should view this? The only way I can answer that is that election officials have to make their decisions, and I believe courts will have to make their decisions before the president's trial goes to conclusion. Before it goes to conclusion. Well, that's interesting and unique. He's makes a powerful argument. I'd love to agree with it, but I just don't. But I also would allow for it to go forward anyway, although I think it would be inviting a lot of trouble. But I'd be willing to, face that trouble. So as I said, the Republicans wouldn't have a problem with this, and they certainly will threaten to do the same to Democratic candidates in the future, regardless of it being, of there being no analogy whatsoever between anything any Democratic candidate or any of the Republican candidates have ever done in the past and what Donald Trump has done in his past. It's a forceful argument, but I don't think we get anywhere near self-execution in this one. All right. So very interesting, but that's all there really is to it. It is very interesting, and that's it. Now, the Washington Post has this piece from Philip Bump just to remind you of what the Republicans are up to and how easy it'll be for them to jump to Luttig's conclusion about Democrats. Biden may soon face impeachment for, and then in brackets it says, reason TBD, right, to be determined. That's where we currently stand. Let's begin, writes, again, Philip Bump, with the rationale that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy offered on Tuesday for launching an impeachment investigation into President Biden. Speaking to Fox Business Network host and former Trump administration official Larry Kudlow, McCarthy argued that such a probe might be warranted once Congress came back into session. It is August, which Congress, like school children, gets off. If the Biden administration continues to fight to withhold information that could really clear all this up, did they take bribes? Did they deal in the business? If they hold that up, we would have to move an impeachment inquiry, which, Larry, gives the apex of power to Congress when it comes to our subpoena power and others to get the documents we need. The bank statements, the credit card statements, and others show us where the money went, McCarthy said. Show us, were you taking money from outside sources? And that would clear most of this up. And they seem to fight it every step of the way. As, of course, every president has ever done about anything, because it's unclear whether or not the Congress ought to be able to order the executive branch to do that. And he's right. If there's an impeachment going on, it is said by the courts that gives them an extra boost to the power of their claims. Anyway, the whole determination here is how the Bidens handle this. He added later, if they provide us the documents, there wouldn't be a need for an impeachment inquiry. Even if you aren't familiar with the gauzy claims on which all of this sits, you can probably pick out a few problems with this argument. One is that it conflates Joe Biden as president, the Biden administration, with Joe Biden as person who has the last name Biden, i.e. the Bidens. This has been common practice since even before the Republicans regained control of the House in January. That Joe Biden's son Hunter was involved in a sprawling and at times dubious set of business engagements, efforts that looped in his Uncle Jim and, it seems, other relatives, has allowed McCarthy and allies like House Oversight Chairman James Comer to refer to the actions of the Biden family, lumping the president into the mix through association. Comer has tried to draw a line between Hunter Biden's business and Joe Biden for months, without pause or success. He has repeatedly presented allegations that incrementally expand the public's awareness of how Hunter Biden's engagements were structured and the partner who provided him funding or other assets, but he has also repeatedly been unable to show how these benefits were shared with the president. He and his allies are left insinuating Biden's involvement by noting, for example, that former business partner had said that Hunter Biden would occasionally put his father on speakerphone in front of clients, failing to admit that the same partner also testified under penalty of perjury that Joe Biden wasn't involved in his son's business. This brings us to another problem with McCarthy's argument. Under what conditions could this inquiry be avoided? The speaker is explicitly arguing that there is no evidence to impeach Biden at this time. His push of an investigation is predicated on the idea that the evidence is being hidden. Never mind that in October of 2019, McCarthy criticized Speaker Nancy Pelosi for, quote, the swiftness and recklessness of her call for an inquiry following the emergence of evidence that Donald Trump had tried to pressure Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky into aiding his re-election campaign. Here, McCarthy is setting an unattainable standard for the administration, or alternatively, the Bidens. Prove its innocence. Any freshman year philosophy student can identify the flaw here. Joe Biden could turn over years of bank records, submitting them to endless scrutiny, and McCarthy no doubt hopes turning up something tangentially problematic in the manner of the Hillary Clinton email server. But McCarthy and his allies, including Comer, could simply insist that something was still missing, something unquestionably inculpating, and so the impeachment inquiry could move forward anyway, assuming the existence of incriminating documents and therefore a cover-up. Remember that there has already been a great deal of information turned over to Comer's committee and other investigators. In fact, in a separate interview with Kudlow back in June, Comer boasted about his success in obtaining documents, which is, of course, they're impeaching him because of their lack of success in obtaining documents, we were just told. Every subpoena that I've had as chairman of House Oversight Committee over the last 5 months, he said, we've gotten 100% of what we requested, whether it's with the FBI or with banks or with the Treasury. By itself, this doesn't comport with McCarthy's presentation that the administration, quote, seems to fight it every step of the way. There's another layer of haze that sits on top of all of this. Much of what's under scrutiny is business activity that occurred when Joe Biden was a private citizen. Only a few elements of what's been elevated by Comer's work overlaps with Biden's service as vice president. If Comer could show that Biden was paid for work led by his son in 2018, that would certainly be at odds with the president's presentations. But would that arrangement by itself warrant impeachment? If so, how did Donald Trump's extra presidential business deals avoid the same fate? And the answer is hypocrisy and gimmicktarianism. What McCarthy and Comer point to, including in McCarthy's case on Tuesday, is a secondhand bribery allegation made public first by Comer and then Senator Chuck Grassley in early May. Since that time, no evidence has emerged to support the claims. So, McCarthy makes mumbling comments about how there's a whistleblower that the FBI still pays, and the FBI believes heavily in, way back years ago, said that they're being bribed, the Biden family, which is not true. The informant merely reported a conversation they'd had with the Ukrainian executive alleging a bribe, an allegation that the informant admitted they could not validate. The executive, meanwhile, has at other times denied any interaction with Joe Biden at all. So this is the standard that McCarthy sets. Time for us to get out of here and roll out. Unless the Bidens can prove they weren't bribed, or can prove that no money went to Joe Biden, or can prove that the U.S. attorney investigating Hunter Biden for tax evasion didn't pull his punches, or can meet whatever other criteria McCarthy might set, there's grounds for an investigation aimed at digging into the president broadly, into his family and his finances. There's reason to hand over endless documents and information to sitting members of Congress, among whom are many who've already endorsed Biden's most likely general election opponent, Donald Trump. Since even before taking the majority earlier this year, the House Republican caucus has established itself as unusually eager to slap impeachments and censures on Biden and members of his administration. McCarthy's embrace of an inquiry is unquestionably a response to pressure from his caucus, but one might hope that if such an extraordinary step were to be taken, it would be conducted with an eye toward fairness, objectivity, and impartiality. That, at least, was the standard McCarthy demanded of Pelosi in 2019 in those words. Well, so much for that. Like I said, hypocrisy and gimmitarianism will rule, no doubt about that. Time now for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, on which he will summarize this and many other issues floating before us. Let's see what he's got on the line here. Oh, yes, story I couldn't make room for today. The blind spot for the Oath Keepers ahead of January 6th. Turns out the Secret Service had. You'll find out more about that on the next program, and, of course,
listening to Kagro in the morning.
In future shows of KITM. Yes, other things. Wildfires raging near the California-Oregon border killed at least one person and destroyed over a dozen homes. The superintendent of Tulsa Public Schools in Oklahoma is stepping aside in an attempt to avert a takeover of the district by the state superintendent, who accused the schools of taking funding from communist China. Stay tuned to see why that doesn't make any damn sense.